Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership podcast. And my guest is Aldo Kane, someone I've been looking forward to having on. We've been chatting about so many things already, and it's the reason I wanted him on was his authenticity. I was listening to his audiobook, which I really like, Lessons from the Edge, Battle-Tested Resilience and How to Lead Under Fire. I listen to many books. This is a must listen to. So get the book, listen to it, or if you're a reader, buy his book and listen to it. But Aldo also appeared in Stas's book, and you did a great podcast together, and it was very authentic. And that's why I liked the conversation. I knew he was the right kind of person for inspiring leadership. So Aldo, welcome. Great having you on. And
thanks for having me.
Thank you for your book. Now, you've just landed about 2 hours ago from Canada. So thank you for being so alert. And you and I, as we're recording this, but it'll be going out much later, it is at the time of remembrance, and you're wearing your gold poppy, and I'm wearing my little red poppy, as we remember those who we serve with, who lost their lives serving Queen and now King and country, but also many others who were very badly injured and their lives were transformed. But also particularly remembering those who were mentally transformed by that. We'll perhaps be talking about that in a minute. But just to talk a little bit about Aldo, one of the youngest elite commando reconnaissance snipers in the UK Armed Forces. He is always leading expeditions into extreme environments, such as abseiling into an erupting volcano in the Democratic Republic of Congo, rowing across the Atlantic Ocean with our friend Foxy, who's a friend of his and been on this podcast too. Great endurance and teamwork, and they probably wanted to kill each other at certain stages, but they survived. Being locked in a bunker for 10 days with zero daylight, testing his mental stamina and ability. Facing threats, including being held at gunpoint and charged by a black rhino during some remote expeditions. Surviving, I don't know why you did this. I really thought this was such crazy stuff. Surviving and escaping Ebola outbreaks while working in high-risk regions in these suits and stuff, going in there for the filming. Diving on Captain Kidd's pirate ship and leading scientific teams in harsh conditions. And launching a successful career outside the military. And having faced demoralizing interviews and career setbacks. The rawness of that transition I love. So, thank you, Aldo, firstly for your service to your country, but also for the amazing extreme things that you do. Welcome. Good having you all here.
Thanks very much for having me. Yeah, been looking forward to it.
Yeah, and let's just talk about some of your colleagues and your comrades, particularly Royal Marine Commandos, do give more than many other people and have had probably, because of the number of tours and the fact that they go into some of the most dangerous spots, you've lost a lot of friends who've been killed. I'm just lost, though. I mean, they're not in the jungle somewhere. No one's going to find them. They are dead. Or you've had friends who are battle-scarred mentally or physically. Do you want to just talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I joined when I was 16 and I left when I was 26. So I've been outside quite a while now, but it's a weird one. You get to remembrance time and you meet up with pals that you haven't seen in 20 years and you fall straight back into that groove. And it's and it's probably the same across the military, but for the Royal Marines, there's a very special connection there, a brotherhood, if you will. And, it lasts a lifetime. And yes, the bigger picture that nobody's really talking about is the people that have taken their own lives since leaving, or further down the line. And I just recently rode a motorbike round all of the Royal Marine bases in the UK with a small team, 4 other ex-Marines. We're raising money for the Royal Marines Association, but actually what the bigger part of it was raising awareness of the Lifting the Lid campaign, which is the Royal Marines charity campaign against suicide prevention and positive mental health. And really, I've spent quite a lot of time this year doing charity work for SAFA and the Royal Marines charity in raising that awareness about promoting positive mental health. And and understanding like the trajectory of someone who's been through a traumatic time, and getting people to know and understand that what they feel is normal and what they're going through is normal, and the trajectory eventually will be, full recovery. But yeah, I mean, it's been part of my life since I was 16. Even before that, I was training myself to join up, when I was like 14 and 15. I'm 47 now, so what's that, 30 years? That the Corps has been part of my life, and I'm an ambassador now for the Royal Marines charity, and I can't sing the praises of the Corps high enough. And really, me getting the jobs that I get now isn't about being the best rigger, the best diver, the best safety guy. It goes back to really, really basic Royal Marine Corps values of, courage, determination, unselfishness, cheerfulness in the face of adversity. If I'm carrying the heaviest load, staying up the latest, doing the planning, getting up early, being a good bootneck, inverted commas, that's kind of what gets me asked back on jobs. It's not anything else.
Yeah, and there's so much. I just want to unpack. There's so much in that. Firstly, the fact that you started out at 14, you were keen to do that, and I think that drive and determination from an early age. We'll perhaps have a chat about that a little later on. But then I have seen you in some really superb Royal Marine films, just short clips on LinkedIn, and there's you speaking. Just with a few words, I just thought it was really well put together, and I think it's great that the Chief of Defence Staff, is the First Sea Lord, is the Royal Marine, and you probably know him. Do you know him?
Yeah, first time in history. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, that's fantastic, and really, it's very inspiring. So that's great news, and I think you touching on lifting the lid, the campaign, and what you do for SAFA and the Royal Marine Charity. Thank you for that. It's not just in the forces, but actually a number of people I come across coaching in business, CEOs of multi-million-pound businesses. They're very wealthy, but some of them are going, well, I only get 4 hours sleep a night. And I find out occasionally I'm bursting into tears. And I don't understand why, and I just work harder because that's the only answer. And I find my behaviour is a bit erratic, but I have to apologise to people afterwards. And I go, these are all mental health issues that they think they're bomb-proof, they are indestructible, and they can just get by on limited sleep. But it catches up with them, doesn't it?
Yeah. Look, anyone, I've spent 30 years working in high risk, high consequence arenas, from warfighting to natural disasters, pandemics, volcano, everything in between there. And I know that I can charge hard for a select period of time. You go on a tour, it's 7 months. You do a filming expedition, it's maybe 2 months. You're on a big wall for 10 days at a time, or you're in a cave system for a couple of weeks, not seeing any daylight. We know we can charge hard for a given amount of time. But when you add that up over the period of a lifetime, especially now that we are entering an age of non-linearity, we are entering an age of exponential growth in all terms. The ultimate, we're still dealing with all of this with the same biology that we had a couple of 100,000 years ago. The stress response, from someone holding a gun at your head to being charged by a wild animal to getting a shitty email, the stress response physiologically is the same. And so we're essentially, when we're charging hard, we're in a stressful situation. We've got all of the stress chemicals coursing around our body. And if we're not doing anything to mitigate that, then you're reducing your effective time by a huge amount. And if you look at WHO figures on burnout, overwhelm, it's on the rise massively, in line with poor mental health. And so if enjoy the job you're doing and you've got big plans for the future, then you need to be looking at what you're doing for yourself outside of work that is bolstering, underpinning your ability to work. And if you look at resilience, your ability to deal with a challenge on any day is a moving target, depending on how much sleep you've had, what's happening at home, what's happening with the kids, any illness that's on the cards, or just a general feeling of, things getting on top of you. And so, in my experience, and I've learned the hard way by trying to charge hard for too long without any recovery, and it catches up with you. It doesn't matter who you are. It used to be a badge of honor saying that, you can deal with 4 hours sleep a night. And, we know that we can do some tasks on 4 hours sleep a night, but it's also the same as being, 2 or 3 pints in, if you're driving, for example, or if you're having, a very cognitively demanding meeting with someone. So it's, really everything that we do outside of the workplace has a direct impact on our productivity, on our capacity for dealing with challenges.
I think that's such an important theme that you're talking about. And you and I were chatting about this, and I was saying with my book launch, which is tomorrow, and all the preparation and sending off 170, 180 books individually, wrapping them all up, writing notes to people. You've been there. And all the preparation of that, and then various different client pieces of work. But then there's the family things laid over it. What's happening with your spouse? What's happening with your children? What's happening with friends? Sudden things come in from a flank, and you have to, almost like back to our military, reassess, has the mission changed? What additional factors have come in? Friendly forces, enemy forces, whoever it might be, family. And I had a moment this weekend. It was just like I was completely feeling overload. And I had a distant relation of mine who I don't know very well, but she's lovely. But she was visiting the UK, and I was trying to fit her in to come and stay with us for 2 days, on top of everything else that had suddenly happened since I'd planned that, and family issues that were going on. And I just rang her up. I said, look, please understand, there's all these other things going on. I would love to see you, but I have to look after my own mental and physical health. And I know I would not be looking after you properly. I wouldn't be present with you, and I'd feel bad about that. And I just need to catch up on my sleep and things like this. So let's do a rain check. And she was absolutely fine about it. And I think we often feel bad about letting people down. But I think it takes a courage to have a to stop doing list. A lot of people have a to-do list. But what are you going to take out? If there's new stuff coming in, what's going? What's your thoughts, Aldo?
Yeah, I mean, that's life, right? We in the military, we have a plan, we have the mission, and then we go away and we work out how we're going to achieve that mission, and then we do the thing, and we practice and we rehearse and we practice, so that in the event of and when the situation completely changes and is turned on its head, you've got capacity to be able to deal with that in the moment. But life generally is hectic. It's only going to get more hectic the more we dive into AI, people trying to keep up with the change. The change is happening so quickly. What it means to be a human is changing more rapidly than it ever has in the history of human beings. And, we live in a very busy, hectic lifestyle. Even on a normal day, you may be answering X amount of 100 emails. You may be on social media, LinkedIn posts, family stuff. So really, the way I deal with this is priorities. I have my mission, what it is that I'm doing, and my life purpose, and then I pretty much say no to everything straight away. That's my trick, because I get asked to do lots of things, and it's very easy to say yes. And down the line, you kind of wish you hadn't said yes, and you're now tied into this thing. So, me personally, to manage my future mental health on a given day in 3 weeks' time, then I pretty much I do a temporal audit. I work out, is this important to my main mission, to my purpose? And if it's not, I pretty much say no. Even if it is something that I want to do, I'll still say no in the moment. And it gives me breathing space to then, come back and say, actually, yes, I can do that podcast, or yes, I can do this event. So that buys you a bit of time and a bit of space. But, even more so now, I've got 2 young boys, one's 4 and one's 1. And it's not changed what I do for a job. I still go and do the things that people might from the outside say are risky. That hasn't changed. But what has changed is being more aggressive with what actually matters. And that really is an audit. I'm prioritizing what's important. You speak to lots of much older people in anecdotal conversations, and they never wish they'd worked more or had more meetings or did more podcasts or more. They actually wish that they'd spent more time with the family. And if we look at your capacity to deal with stressful situations, call it resilience if you want, that boils down to some really basic things like, are you sleeping enough? Are you eating well? Are you exercising? And are you maintaining your social networks, your family, the relationships in real life that matter? And that underpins resilience. That underpins being a good leader. And, there's a big difference between being busy and being productive. And we're all guilty of it nowadays, of being busy and feeling like we're productive. But if you look at an organization, and Joe Bloggs, his main job is to do this one thing, and yet he spends the first 4 hours of every day on Slack meetings and emails and firefighting, and he's not actually doing the thing. He's busy, or she's busy, but they're not being productive. And so I guess I've been aware of that more in the last 10 years. And it comes down to prioritizing what it is that you need to do to achieve your mission, but also not in, and you're not in danger of burning out in that process.
I think there's great wisdom there. And I wish more of the CEOs and the leaders I work with would really focus on where they can add value and where they should say no to things. Because when you say yes to so much, you're actually saying no probably to your own health, to your own personal relationship with your partner, and to your relationship, in your case, with your young boys. And I've got, as I'm looking at you, I put it deliberately in eyesight, my 2025 milestone priorities. And Lee, love her unconditionally, my wife, Lee. She's number 1. Number 2 is my family. Love our 4 children, 4 partners, 4 grandchildren, and my brother, Graham. Health, my fitness, going through operations, recovery, and relaxed chill time. I put it on there. Book, write and sell the CEO's Compass globally and record the audio bit. I've done that. CEOs, done that, working with them. Podcasts, wealth, manage and build it so it can be enjoyed. Experiences, travel to Nepal, which I've just done, come back. And then the charity, deliver the right to inspire and help the victims of violence against women and girls. So that's all there. And at the bottom I've put, which you'd probably like, shed 80% of what I do every year.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the main, the 80-20 principle, which is probably very well known in sort of the business world, but 80% of your productivity comes probably from 20% of what you're doing, if that makes sense. So you need to dial into like, what is the biggest leverage thing that you do in all of the tasks that you do, and do more of that. And actually, the majority of stuff that we get busy with are they're not pushing the mission. They're not pushing you in the right direction. You're kind of treading water, if you will, with all of the, and if you don't have a plan, you become part of someone else's. And especially now, if you're not concentrating on your mission, your family, your recovery, your health, then you just get swept up in everything else that's going on. And before you know it, you're at the end of the line, or you've got a health condition which is incredibly difficult to come back from. And we all are busy doing all this stuff and being productive, and as soon as you have a life-changing illness or condition through neglect that's come in, none of that matters, because all you need to do and all you will want to do is get better.
You are spot on, Aldo. And what many leaders are living is an inflammatory lifestyle.
Yeah.
So it's not only mentally inflammatory, that the brain does get actually inflamed because of lack of sleep or alcohol or drugs or whatever it might be, or a lot of stress, a lot of cortisol and adrenaline and all the hormones with there. But then the body is as well. So, I mean, a lot of people go, and I was a long distance mountain marathon runner, but they go, Paula Radcliffe, amazing, marathon runner. But actually, look at her. She's gone and she actually overinflamed her body by the miles that she did. So as we get older, and I'm 10 years your senior, but not senior, probably you've learnt more than me, but I'm an old bastard. But the point is, I'm now doing less things that inflame the body. But I know very quickly, if I go for a run on the canal, as I did with the dogs, that the Baker's cyst pops out the back of my knee and it's just inflamed. I go, what's going on? Well, perhaps the knee's a bit shot through. So be careful on that. Find something that's less inflammatory. But then there's the foods as well. And I found out the other day in Nepal, because their milk is different from ours, suddenly I realized from probably about 10 years of ignoring it, that I'm actually lactose intolerant. And it had a massive impact on me. Now I've found that I can look after the body better. But I think the point you're making is one relevant for all leaders listening to this, men and women around the world, that look after your health, do those checks, find out what inflames your body from the food you have. I mean, there's so much junk food, which is causing obesity and things like that, produced by a lot of these very wealthy, big food companies who probably have a GDP bigger than the whole of the UK. And, you don't get people advertising broccoli. There's no marketing budget for broccoli, but there is for Cheerios or some Fruit Loops or some utter junk full of sugar. So looking after yourself so you don't have an inflammatory lifestyle and way of living. And I know at times when I'm overdoing things, I can see all the things you've talked about are affecting me. And I know after I've done this book launch, I want some periods of time. But somebody once said to me, tomorrow's not a slower day. And the other thing, before I pass it back over to you, Aldo, E.O. Wilson, who recently died, is a very famous biologist. But he said, we have godlike technology today, but we have medieval institutions and we have Paleolithic emotions. Our emotions have not changed from our great ancestors, and so things trigger us. So all the experiences that you're having, Aldo, in extreme conditions that no one in their right mind would do, but you do it, whether it be rigging or diving or some safety or being in really dangerous places. You've got to have that downtime and you've got to recover so you can go back into the fight again. What's your thoughts?
I am, if you think about like the sort of barbell strategy, where you've got on one side a huge weight, and then on the other side you've got a small weight. So you're splitting it. So that example would be my life at work is hectic, it's stressful, it's chaotic, it's inflammatory in lots of different ways, and that's the big piece. But then if I had the same in my private life, which I did do for years, of trying to have a chaotic, busy working life, and also through mistakes and booze and military lifestyle, having the chaotic home life, then it kind of pulls you apart there. So for me now, the way I manage my life is that my home life is very organized. It's not stressful as much as it can be, and it's the antidote to the hectic work side of it. But I've done quite a lot of work over the last couple of years with a human performance psychologist, Andy McCann, and that's exactly what he was explaining to me, is that we have the biology. It's hundreds of thousands of years old, and when you get that shitty email, you're still having the same response that you would do to a big stressor. Whereas back in the day, we're very well adapted to dealing with stress in the moment. Our body is well evolved for dealing with the immediate stressor. Get out of the way, sort it out, dump it, park it, leave it. But if you imagine a normal working day, you've been up through the night with the kids, you then get up, you're straight on social media, cortisol spikes because, you may be jealous of what someone else is doing or worrying about what someone else is doing. Then it's into the tube to get to work, more cortisol, onto the emails, more cortisol. You're just building this over the period of days, weeks, months, years. And if you're not proactively, and this is from Andy's work, if you're not proactively managing that, then that's a recipe for disaster. So, like in a stressful situation, you stop digesting food, there's lots of knock-on effects. That is why, you look at someone who is continually stressed through work, their diet's poor, they're not digesting it properly, they're then pre-diabetic, there's then all of these, prolonged chronic stress does lead to a whole host of issues which will kill you, whether it's heart, whether it's stroke, whether it's, stress, diabetes, whatever it is. So ultimately, all of this, regardless of what job you do, where you do it, you need to be looking after yourself to be able to keep doing that job. And that's all the basics of sleep, exercise, nutrition, and social groups. But there's certainly over the last 20 years been a badge of honor in how hard you work and how hard you graft. But, we're now seeing the effects of that where people are burnt out, diabetic, dying of heart attacks in their 50s and their 60s because they've neglected all of the things that are as important. It's a strange way to look at it, but when you have a ramped up schedule at work, say Q2 is going to be super busy, that you've got X, Y, and Z on, you're going to be really busy. The thing that most people do is they cut back on the walking the dog, the exercise, the sauna, the things of recovery. But that is a time when you need to be increasing all of those so that you're dampening the effects of the stress. So you're having these state changes from being at work, Aldo doing stressful job, come home, defrag, whatever it is, that circuit breaker that brings you back down. So it's kind of, it's a balance. I think Andy calls it allostatic load. So you want that, the stressors to be in balance with the recovery.
And it's very interesting you say that because this morning, I was planning on doing a run with the dogs. I don't know, about 3 kilometers, not very far, but just good run. Nice, get the heart rate up, zone 4, bit of into zone 5. Then come back and do a push weight session. So I've got a personal trainer who's a bodybuilder. Not that I've got a body that's worth building, but it's just in older life stopping the sarcopenia and the muscle wastage. So I want to keep athletic and strong. And there's a set diet that he gets me on, and I've been following this for about 3 years now, and I stick rigidly to it. And I was tempted to go, I've got so much on. Perhaps I skip the weights. I went, no, I'm not going to skip the weights because A, I like it for longevity and my health, but B, it's a de-stressor to all that's going on. And then also for me, because at my age, I wake up a few times during the night, I will nearly always, wherever I am, try and get 30 minutes of a midday power nap. And I go into deep sleep. I had 25 minutes of deep sleep. It was just a joy. So I get 2 parts a day. So I'm really embracing everything that you and Andy McCann were talking about. Talking about other people who give you good advice, I'm always interested, just like you were recommended by a number of your Royal Marine colleagues to come on the podcast. So that's it. I don't accept any agencies anymore. Agencies are trying to sell someone to me that I don't know who they are, and they've got an ulterior motive, which is to be paid to get someone on my podcast. I'd much rather have, you were recommended by people I trust and so on. So who would you want to, which sort of interesting personalities who've done a lot in their lives, and you find inspiring, Aldo. Who would you like as your guest on the podcast, and why do you think they'd be good guests?
That's a good question on the spot here.
Yeah.
Someone who I've been working with recently is a former Royal Marine called Al Chambers,
Okay.
MBE, and he's done a lot of polar exploration, and for the last 25 years, I think he's been running these amazing trips and expeditions, world firsts often, and with sometimes with some of the most rich and famous people in sort of tech worlds, etc. But yeah, he's someone who's I'm always blown away by his talks and his mindset. And I guess in a way we're in a little bit of an echo chamber with Royal Marines that are out there doing stuff, but there's a lot of people out there. Preet Chandri, she's also doing the polar exploration stuff. She is phenomenal at what she's been doing, and also spreading the certainly in the adventure world, it can be quite a it's like it's difficult for women to get in and break into it, and they're doing amazing things. Hazel Finlay and Climber that I've done some work with recently, and Heidi Svestra. These are amazing people in the adventure space that are doing really cutting edge expeditions, whether it's science based or or just adventure for adventure's sake. That's probably top of my list there.
Fantastic. Well, they are the kind of people, and I've come across Preet, but haven't had her on yet. So after we finish this, do drop a note to Al and Preet and just say, look, I recommended you. And I know they're busy and they're doing their bits and pieces, but I've got guests until 6 months from now, so there's no queue. There is a long queue. What I meant. So that's great. The people inspire. Now, I am fascinated by people's origin story. There was Aldo at 14, who was already training to become a Royal Marine. Your book, Lessons from the Edge, is fascinating. Sometimes people are shaped by wanting to get away from an early life they don't want to be part of, so it's away from. And others want to move towards something that they admire and they want to do. But you've been through a lot in your life, and you were very open, very raw about it, and I really admire that. And I was the same in my own book, and people always go, wow, that was courageous saying that, meaning you're an idiot. I wouldn't tell people about my mistakes. But what was it that shaped you in early life? And who did?
I've had a perfectly brilliant, amazing upbringing. It was my parents are still together, and there was 5 of us, 5 kids, and my dad just worked for the part of it. So I come from a working class family. We obviously didn't have very much money at all with 5 kids, and no foreign travel or any of that stuff. But so I wasn't getting away from something because I had a great life. I was in the Scouts, I was in the Cadets, I was spending time outdoors. But what drove me to join the Marines was a quest for adventure. It was an opportunity. The military was an opportunity for me as at the time, I would have said I was non-academic. I now, obviously, I'm far from that now. I probably read more books than anyone I know. But at the time, that's not what was driving me. I was a young boy. I was full of testosterone. I wanted to, challenge myself, and the military offered that window. And from a very young age, I was very curious about the world. I still am. It's what drives me now. I'm passionate and curious about travel, and seeing different communities and different places and where I fit into it all. So since I was a young kid, I've always asked those questions, and the military, I guess, gave me that window. how it ended up being the Marines was just down to, some people in the cadets I knew went to get in and they failed, and it kind of gave me, inspiration. Could I do it? Could I pass it? Longest, hardest infantry training in the world. What sort of person do you need to become to be self-sufficient in the jungle, in the Arctic, in the mountains, or wherever else? And that was really, the sort of driving force behind it. So it was a quest for adventure to get me into something that would then allow me to travel and see the world.
And I seem to remember in your book, the Scouts was quite influential, and your parents just cutting you some slack to go and explore, and you were quite adventurous from really quite early on with your mates and the things you did. Was that correct?
Yeah, and looking back, we weren't doing anything different to anyone else at that time, and going back your generation and before that, it was just normal to go out and head out on a Friday night and come back on a Sunday, at 13, 14, and tell the parents we were going camping or sleeping up in the woods at the, in the back of the estate that we lived in. I think that's what's missing now with, there's quite a few books that I've read recently on it, but essentially when smartphones, social media and high-speed internet came in, round about the same time as everyone was told that they had to worry about their kids because, pedophiles or baddies were hanging around in swing parks. And actually what happened is we brought these generations of kids in away from the baddies that were hanging around swing parks, where kids learn about risk and risk taking and interplay between each other and interpersonal skills. And we stuck them down in front of a computer where the baddies were actually hanging out. So in a way, we've removed that vital building block. Kids weren't getting injured. As soon as 2008 and internet and social media came in, like kids going to A&E with broken legs from falling out of trees sharply dropped. So my upbringing was outdoors, and I feel very fortunate for it now because the work that I've been doing with Andy over the last couple of years, we've learned that the very basics of elite human performance, resilience, capacity building, all of that is built outside. It's built outdoors. It's not built in a corporate setting. It's not built at home, sitting in the house. And I don't mean going and climbing big walls or going into cave systems. I mean going for a walk outside with a dog, not on your phone, and being present. Like all of these very, very basic things that we know underpin human performance, we're not doing anymore. And it's, you just need to look at the quote unquote crazies of like forest bathing or cold water swimming, or these things that we used to just say we're going to go and play in the forest or we're going to go and jump in that river. They're now sort of like multi-million-pound industries that people are doing because we don't get that stimulation elsewhere. So I feel very fortunate that I was brought up in the outdoors, and that sort of underpins everything that I've done since.
Yeah, I think it's very fascinating. And on the topic of elite human performance, when you get asked to speak in a lot of different places and on different podcasts, but when businesses are asking you how you take the lessons from what you do in extreme environments and pass that on to leaders and managers in business, what are some of the themes that you bring up and how you make the connection with what you do and what they do in such different worlds?
I think one of the, obviously resilience is a big one, and we've talked a lot about that already, but I think one of the big ones is around decision-making, and decision-making in stressful situations or situations that there's big consequences from it. And really that, for me, that when I'm talking about that, I talk about how I make decisions in the field, and it's usually based on intuition first.
Yeah.
The more of the jobs that I've done, the more I understand. I have a gut feeling. There's now quite a lot of study into the gut-brain axis and how actually it's a viable option of understanding a situation or situational awareness, that initial gut feeling.
Just staying with that one for a minute, Aldo. I think that's really fascinating. I was taught by a neuroscientist that I was working with, who explains the complex very simply to me, that we've got 89 billion neurons in our brain. The logic and things go on there. Around our heart, we've got 40,000 neurons. And the heart is a mini brain and communicates more with the main brain than the brain communicates with the heart. And then in our, as you say, the gastrointestinal tract with the vagal nerve that runs all the way from the gut all the way to the brain, we have another mini brain, which has got 100 million neurons in. Okay, it's not 89 billion, but it's 100 million. And so when you and I have a intuition or a gut feeling, there's actually a lot of data that it's gathering, and it's passing it to the brain, and it's going, like, I mean, I got ripped off by a psychopathic friend, supposedly friend of a friend, to sell some properties. The guy were fraudsters anyway, and my friend let me down very badly and deceived me completely. And he was godfather to my daughter many years ago. And so he should have gone to jail, but actually I stepped away from it. The reason I mentioned this was my gut was telling me this guy isn't genuine. But I needed to sell some properties I had in Cyprus, for example. And he said he was a multimillionaire from Sri Lanka. He actually was a property fraudster who'd been to jail already. But something was telling me something wasn't right. But yet the logical part of me was going, no, you must sell this property because otherwise you're going to be in a difficult financial situation. But it was screaming out, there was this conflict. And do you find this, you actually listen to your intuition?
Yeah, I do now. Because your gut and your intuition are they're there. It's a survival mechanism, really. I'm far from a neuroscientist or psychologist, but I know that in a situation, what I'm making my mind up in the moment is a feeling, is a vibe, is a whatever, based on my experience and intuition. So I will then make a decision based on that. But in the meantime, I'm looking for facts. I'm continually looking. So I'll use intuition first, and then I'll start to analyze the situation. When information comes in that's fact, that I can see as fact, it's not clouded by my biases or judgments or other people's opinions. I will then change my decision accordingly. I don't care if I'm right or wrong. I just want to be doing the right thing at the right time. So, I guess decision-making comes up. There's an amazing book written by Amanda Ripley, and it breaks down in survival situations what and traumatic events, what the sort of normal course of action is for people. And she calls it the survival arc, the 3Ds: denial, deliberation, then decision. So, you always get told on an airplane, if there's a fire, leave all your kit behind, get off as fast as you can, leave everything. But the majority of people in all of the history when this has happened is there's this collecting psychological phenomenon, which probably goes back to, the forest fires in the savannah. It's coming towards you, grab what you can that you need to survive and go. But that may have been adaptive many years ago, but that is not an adaptive strategy now. A fire in a building, and look at the Twin Towers. She references that the amount of people that are standing there or sitting, sending emails when the building's falling around. So denial and deliberation. But if you look in a personal way, in relationships, or you look at the business point of view, the way that translates in is the most unhappiness in an organization is probably down to indecision. And indecision is a decision. People in deliberation and denial and going round in circles instead of making a decision creates disquiet in the organization. And certainly in my line of work, I want to get to a decision quickly. And even if it's the wrong decision, I've made a decision. And so in a survival situation, or when the shit hits the fan, we capsized mid-Atlantic on rowing from Portugal to Venezuela. And, there's almost everything is out of your control. probably like 99.999% of everything that's happening is uncontrollable. But that 0.001% of thing you can do is make a decision. All right, we need to do this. Let's do that because we know we can do this little bit. And that gives you a sense of agency. And if you look at the happiest people in the world, they have a sense of agency. So they feel like they've got control. And also they're grateful for everything that they have, right? So gratitude and agency. So in business terms, you know, if you're going round in circles for weeks, or relationship terms, let's say, for example, you're in a bad relationship and you're just not going to make the decision. You're in denial or deliberation. It's a wormhole into unhappiness. All of that directly undermines your capacity to be able to be operating effectively at that high level.
Great advice, and there's so much in there, so much richness. Let's do a quick fire round the compass, sort of Aldo's sort of advice to leaders listening around the world. So we'll begin with moral quotient. What should people do when they see their values slip? How have you found people get back onto true north? Well, what's your advice?
That for me, that comes down to motivation. So your values, this is my opinion, your values are in line with your motivation. But if you're extrinsically motivated by promotion, likes, fame, money, all of this stuff, it's very easy to come away from your values. Whereas if you're intrinsically motivated, the motivation, for example, that I needed to go through the longest, hardest infantry training in the world at the age of 16 means that whenever things get hard, it's easy for me to keep going because I'm motivated inside regardless of what's happening outside. So I find that intrinsic motivation is, when it's directly linked with your values, keeps you on course.
Fantastic. Love that one. And purpose, PQ is the next one, meaning and purpose. You've got a clear idea about what gives your life meaning and purpose, you know, your wife, your two boys, and the work you do. But when you've got someone else who's lost a sense of meaning and purpose, how do you help them find it? You might be Royal Marine friends, you know, through lifting the lid or something like that, but they've lost meaning and purpose. How do you help them find meaning and purpose?
I think this is interesting because I think we are heading headlong into this as humanity, as AI, robotics take over almost all white collar jobs, and down the line, probably most sort of physical jobs. So we're going to be in a bit of a crisis where people no longer have the purpose of their job or what it is. For me, it was going back to basics and actually looking at what made me happy. Because when I left the Marines, I was chasing all sorts of things. I was chasing jobs offshore and trying to set up multiple businesses in arenas that I didn't really know much about, but I heard that there was a lot of money there. And actually I was unhappy. I was unsuccessful. And I wasn't getting anywhere with it. And so I kind of went back to basics, and I remember sitting down and writing out what made me happy. And what made me happy was being outdoors. It was the stuff why I joined the Marines. It was being outdoors. It was being adventurous, feeling part of a team, an elite high performing team. And so I kind of, you do a gap analysis of where you want to be and where you are. And then it's literally just a practical, evolution there to then work it out.
I think that's really, really great advice. You know, what makes you happy, write it down, and then aim to do things that bring you joy. Like, for example, the work I do here, the podcast, and the coaching of people. It just gives me immense intrinsic satisfaction from doing this.
Yeah.
And therefore, I'll be doing it as long as I can, as long as I'm healthy. Which takes me to the next one, health quotient. We've talked quite a bit about health and wellness, but if you were to give a couple of tips to people, about one tip on mental health and one tip on physical health, what advice would you give people listening?
Physical health is an easy one. If you do a temporal audit and you zoom out and look at your life down the line in 10 years or 5 years or 1 year, you're going to wish that you had started your journey today. And so, it can be quite daunting if you've never done it. You're running a company and you've never done exercise and you're 45. The brutal truth is, if you've never done any weightlifting or cardiovascular stuff, you're looking down the barrel of shortening your life by quite a large bit. So start today and start. You don't need to be, throwing loads of tin around. Just get started. Go for a walk. Mental health. Really, this is key. Is that you need to be recovering as hard as you're charging, and if you're heading into a really busy bit of work coming up, you need to be programming in your downtime and your recovery, whether it's exercise. And you can stack these all on top of each other. Going for the walk in the morning is your exercise. It's also your free space. You're, increasing your emotional capacity. So you can kind of stack them all on top of each other. But, for health and emotional, it's really about starting now and doing something regardless of how small and insignificant it feels.
Yeah, love that one. And the next one is emotional intelligence. And you were talking about relationships with people, and the network, the community you have is going to be very important for your mental health, as you've been advertising a lot. But what would be a tip you'd give to people to listen well?
It's a good question, and I'm certainly no expert at it, but I'm trying to get better at it. But actively listening to conversations, like when my wife's speaking to me, instead of me being busy on my phone and I'm thinking about the next thing, and the next thing is trying to actively listen to what that person is saying, but not just listening to what they're saying, but to see with my own eyes what they mean. And I'm not an expert at this in any way, and I've definitely got it wrong over the years and completely missed the point.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get better at that.
And it's always work in progress for all of us. I mean, even though I teach about EQ, there are moments when I catch myself when my wife's chatting to me, and it's just easy to go on your phone and you go, just stop it. This is the person you love. Listen to her in the way you would to a client, not as in too boringly, but just give her your undivided. Be here now. As we say.
Yeah.
Okay. CQ is collaborative, cognitive, and cultural intelligence. How do you recommend people to get on with people who are very different to them? Any tips you'd give on that?
Yeah, we often will be in a extreme environment working with people that we don't necessarily get on with, and we wouldn't be going for a pint with, if we had the opportunity not to. But really, collaboration. The military is very good at it. You don't need to like the person who's next to you, but you need to be able to trust them to be able to do that job. I find in situations like that is giving people time to talk about themselves. People love talking about themselves, and allowing people that space, to I guess, share their experiences, and realizing, ultimately, I've traveled to well over 115 countries and, all sorts of different places around the world. And what you realize is people are all the same. We spend our entire time fighting with people because they've got different belief systems, a different color of skin, or whatever it is. And ultimately, everyone's the same. Everyone is important to someone else, and everyone is feeling insignificant and have their own insecurities. And I guess by seeing that and being compassionate in the moment really does help.
Cracking. I love that. Last three is resilience, then brand, then legacy. Resilience is a particular forte of yours. If you were to give people advice in business, let's say, picking themselves up in times of adversity, what would be your tip for that?
I guess it's, there's a lot of work out there and a lot of science out there. I would say the first thing to realize is that everyone has capacity to be resilient, and everyone is resilient in different, areas of their life. You may have someone who is very resilient at work and they can take beat down after beat down after beat down, but they're incredibly fragile in their personal relationships outside of outside of work. So we have different modes of resilience, and your resilience is directly undermined by being tired. It's directly undermined by fear. When we're fearful, we shut down the parts of our brain that allow us to be emotionally intelligent or to be resilient. Optimism goes a long way. Being optimistic about the situation, and I find, like, it's very easy in a situation to awfulize and to get, like, this is shit, my life's over, this is going to be a disaster. When you zoom out in the moment and think, actually, does this matter? But we all know from all the things that we've been through in our life that, even the worst things that you can imagine, either death or, relationship breakdown or losing money or, loss of face, time heals a lot of it. It doesn't make it easier, but it gives you, another coping mechanism, knowing that in the future, you're probably going to be all right.
Fantastic. So, Brand, what have you learned from 360 feedback? Do you actually, in your job, you obviously, people won't hire you again unless they've had a good experience with you in some of the dangerous spots. But what is a tip you'd give to people about getting and listening to 360 feedback?
For me, feedback is imperative, and it's imperative in the moment. And, in the military, you might have a hot debrief and you talk about what's going on and what happened and who did what. Which also, as a sort of aside, is how you make meaning in a situation like that with a hot debrief or whatever actually impacts how you deal with that stressor down the line. So making meaning in the moment actually does help build capacity and resilience. But for me, feedback is, I like it immediately, and I don't take it personally. Feedback to me is just a way of, it's like a heat-seeking missile. It doesn't just go from here to there. It goes off and it gets corrected, and then it goes off and then it gets corrected. That's essentially what feedback is. And, if you're taking offense, some people are very bad at giving feedback, like the old school way of the shit sandwich or whatever. But, ultimately, feedback, we should welcome it. If we're looking to improve ourselves, our situation, and, our production, then we should accept feedback. And we should also accept the fact that the majority of people are not trained in giving feedback constructively.
Yeah, they're certainly not. And final one, what would you like your legacy to be before we go on to the top tip? What would you like your legacy to be?
I think, from writing the book and the amount of podcasts and talks that I do, I would like my legacy to be that, an inspiration to people. I am no different to anyone else, and I have the same issues as everyone else, feeling imposter syndrome, and why would someone want to listen to me? But ultimately, if it makes a difference to someone's life, then I'm very happy to share my story. And I think it's important, and honesty and integrity. Life isn't easy. Life hasn't been easy, and I'm certainly not nailing it in every department. That's for sure.
We're always work in progress, or as they call in technology, we're in the beta version of the software development. Lovely. Yeah. So now we'll switch across. Would you please introduce yourself, say what you're doing now, what you've done in the past, and give us your top tip in 2 minutes?
Yeah, my name is Aldo Kane. I'm a former Royal Marine Commando sniper. I spent 10 years in the Royal Marines, and for the last 16 years, I've been leading expeditions around the world for television and film in some of the most extreme, remote, and hazardous environments on the planet. My top tip for people in leadership positions, and just, ultimately, everyone is in a leadership position to someone else, whether you're a father, a mother, or, at work, at the football team, a coach, really is that if you want to continue charging hard and doing the thing that you're doing and you love it, you need to take time out for yourself to make sure that you're recovering daily, weekly, every quarter, and every year. And these aren't nice to haves and luxuries. The harder you're charging, the more time you need to schedule into your calendar: gym time, walk time, family time, shutdown time. So that would be it. If you're charging hard, you need to recover hard.
Fantastic. Well, look, Aldo Kane, it's been an absolute honor having you on the Inspiring Leadership podcast. You live up to it with humility, humanity, and a lovely sense of humor. And thank you for your book, Lessons from the Edge. I thoroughly recommend it to everybody. And good luck with the work you do.
Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate that. And hopefully listeners get something out of it.
I know they will. Thanks, Aldo.